is friendship, and the purpose of losing money honourably as a publisher is friendship. So you're all very welcome. Thank you for coming. We thought, because the JoCA is in effect a form of public conversation, that we should instigate one now, and we're going to move from prose to poetry. Geraldine Clarkson, very brilliant poet who contributed to the first issue, is here, and thus will fulfil my lifelong ambition to unite, or to reunite, architecture with poetry. This is Michael Badu, a very fine architect, Andrew Crompton, a very fine architect, teacher and writer, and Joseph Rickbert, who's very fine at everything. The JoCA, or Journal of Civic Architecture, came about through a conversation between Andrew and I, who was my boss at the University of Liverpool. We received an endowment from an alumnus who didn't have any family and left some money, and Andrew said, what should we do with it? And I thought, what's a really good way to spend some money? Let's make a journal. And for various reasons, academic publishing isn't in a healthy state. And the internet, which is a wonderful thing, doesn't quite replace or fulfill the pleasures of the material world. Consequently with this, Emma Kalkoven, a very wonderful designer who we worked with on Civic Ground, left Artifice and Black Dog and joined the office, was renting some space in the office, and rather than charging her rent, we thought we could give her a project, and this is the project. In the meantime, Artifice and Black Dog sadly went out of business, and we became a bookseller because we had a load of books. And then we thought, well, why don't we also become a publisher? And so the Canal Side Press, which publishes this, is shortly going to publish a monograph of David Grandalge's photographs. I have plans afoot with a young academic to publish what he considers to be volume 2 of the Poetics of Space. And really we're looking for you guys to contribute, please, to share with us stuff which the narrow confines of academic publishing, which seems to be producing things for the consumption of very few people. It's becoming an ever more private conversation. And we thought that architecture is fundamentally a civic activity, more grounded in the city, and that a journal of civic architecture could kind of stand in for that public discourse. So this all sounds very worthy and pretentious. The journal actually, I hope you will agree, is a visual feast and a delight. And it shifts from work by historians to poets to practitioners. The first issue, I realised, writing the editorial, kind of brings together a lot of my personal predilections, and inevitably, perhaps as a network, a lot of the articles are about things in Ireland. What I didn't realise until I was thinking about tonight is there's lots of Liverpool in here as well. So Tom Dubois, who is the architect of the new Palace Theatre in Galway, can't be here tonight, sadly. Johan Selsing, who's written an article about decorum. It's about Alberti's work in relationship to Lactan and Vassal, architecture, and his own work. Johan is the son of Peter Selsing, the great Swedish 20th century architect, and this is a project that you probably know about that Johan built in the grounds of the Woodland Cemetery in Stockholm a few years ago. It's a form of, I suppose, kind of meditative, contemplative, reflective self-justification for taking an artistic and cultural position today, which hopefully is regenerative to him and to others. The other contributors who can't be here sadly are Indra Kargaswamy-Kiran, who is female, Simon Walker, who's an architect, Laura Evans is female. I'm very conscious that this is a manel, apart from Geraldine, who's going to provide us with inspiration. Chinozuki and Luisa Kalina also contributed there in Milan. Chino's actually in Düsseldorf giving a talk tonight, sadly. Johan is in Berlin. So, Andrew, why did we think that doing a new journal of architecture, when the entire print media is dying, was a good idea, do you think?
It is a little bit mad because, but when the book goes and it's all over, what you're left with, you're not going to like. So I feel as I scan the books in my library and as bookshops vanish and paper of this kind vanishes, I feel a light is going out of my life. As if the things on my shelf are very precious and meaningful for me, but the people I leave them to will not know what passes through their hands when they put it in the dustbin. So I feel I stand at the end of something, like at the end of Rome, and this is just a little candle that is about to be blown out. But I'm an old git, so you don't have to believe that.
I remember Joseph, somebody asked me at the launch of Civic Ground when we sat at this table why I'd made a book and why I'd made such a booky book. And Joseph whispered in my ear, I don't know if you actually said this, because they can't change your fucking books, but they can fuck up your buildings.
I spoke from experience.
Interestingly, Joseph's contribution is a design project. What I think we tend to forget today is that a lot of the best writing about architecture is by architects. Alvaro Caesar writes beautifully. Le Corbusier published 58 books. Obviously, Vitruvius and Palladio were great self-publicists. Joseph is an architect, and this is his project for the Liverpool Cathedral competition. And I think with different kind of wind in your sails, one's life could have gone in a different direction, or the balance between reflective criticism and writing and design would have been slightly different. But I think you're probably one of the few people left who, unlike the current academic tenure track world, whether you're either a professor of architectural history or star architect, you're an architect that writes. And the Liverpool project is very odd because it's quite different to your writing in the sense that the common perception of your writing, I think, in America at least, is that it's a harbinger of postmodernity in some ways, it's antiquarian, but as an architect you're stridently modernist, it seems to me.
I've never understood what postmodernism is about. Don't try and explain.
But Joseph, the project for the cathedral looks like a nun's hat, such as they wear in orders in Belgium.
Yes, I don't like that association, but I mean, it's not right.
No, but
the association I like, which actually hasn't come out because it's on the side drawing, is that it's like an animal skin. It's like a tent made of animal skins. Yeah.
Which
side
is
plan? No, it's side plan of the roof.
Which is a reference to Moses' tent.
The attempt at
the desert.
Which was something that Louis Kahn simultaneously was dealing with.
Louis Kahn was very involved with that sort of idea.
Michael, this is going to get a bit weird, right? Bear with me for a moment, right?
I'm scared.
despite my best efforts to turn myself into a mensch, I remain a Catholic Irish man. Joseph was brought up in a Jewish household in Poland, as we know from his recent memoir, and is now a Catholic. Andrew is an Anglican,
Correct.
but within the kind of high church realms of...
I slip from time to time, but
You slip back to a simple table and pure...
high
bread.
church, high church.
High church. And Michael was brought up as a Catholic and is now a Muslim and is an architect who, it's fair to say, I think not only does but specialises in mosques and religious architecture.
Yeah, for my sins.
Oh, is it? So it's still a Catholic. So it's a form of redemption, isn't it? Can you tell us about these two photographs? You've written about your experience of both spiritual traditions.
So the first photograph is Sinan's Soleimani Mosque in Istanbul, and the second photograph is St Mary's RC Catholic Church in Croydon, which is where I used to go when I was at secondary school, and where I was confirmed. I had my first Holy Communion at another church, but that was actually my old high school is right next door to that church as well. So that was our high school church. So I mean, Patrick asked me. Patrick put out a general call for papers, and I said, why don't I do something about mosques and churches, because I kind of have good experience of both. I mean, when I was working in private practice as an architect, I worked for a conservation practice. A lot of our biggest client was the Church of England. So both as a religious person and an architect, I have lots of experience. It wasn't planned with mosques and churches. And so I just kind of wrote this piece, and it was more or less what came into my head. But I guess the what sort of came out of it was how, sort of following on from Patrick's recent book, really, his ideas to do with situating architecture, the kind of the failure of formalism in architecture. It's to do with how the ritual takes over, life takes over. I write about my experience. It's quite interesting because I had to remember it. Experience in Catholic churches. You never worry about the things that architects obsess about when you're using a religious space, because the stakes are so high. You know, this is a religious experience. You don't care about shadow gaps and perfectly sort of proportioned pieces when you're using these spaces. All I remember are central aisles, side aisles, the carvings on the side walls which demarcate the Stations of the Cross, and the relation of that to Good Friday. I remember the 3-hour Good Friday service, the adoration of the cross, and the confessionals, and the magical spaces as well as a kid. The magical spaces of the confessional, and also the space behind the altar, which I got to spend a bit of time in because I was an altar boy as well when I was about 9. And I mentioned this anecdote in the article where I was always afraid that if I dropped the holy water and the Eucharist, that the whole building would tumble down, because from Indiana Jones to Conan the Destroyer, that's what happens, right? So yeah, and I relate that to sort of being at home and making small spaces, spaceships, and kind of imaginary spaces, which is why the confessional was so interesting to me as a kid.
What's unusual, I think, about what you're doing? This is a project for a mosque in Galway, and so coincidentally, Tom de Bois's Palace Theatre is so Galway is kind of modernising in the sense that it's getting EU funding, it's introducing an arts scene, but at the same time there's a diaspora, and so there's a form of reaffirmment of traditional culture. But interestingly, what Michael was involved in, and this is a competition project for Christina, is the question of the role of women in the I don't know if liturgy is the correct phrase, but
Yeah, it's a good phrase.
the spatial
Yeah.
dynamics and organisation
Mm.
of the event. And so it's oddly critical of tradition whilst operating within a language of architecture which is
Traditional.
or civic, I think it is.
Yeah.
The thing about civic, I think, if you put it in front of architecture, is it orients it. It stops it being introverted and experimental for its own sake or dislocated. Well, I think it makes it into an art, actually, because I think the art of architecture is its contribution to the city. That's the thing I'm getting at, I think, with this. And the first issue is, in some ways, about portraiture, because it's partly a form of memoir, but also about the way in which buildings can reveal more of a place to its inhabitants. I just want to return to Andrew for a second, because we haven't spoken about Edgar Wood, who is a very unusual character. One gets the sense as a personality. And his work is not in the canon of architecture. This is going to sound like a terrible name drop, but bear with me for a second. Raphael Moneo and I are both architects, partly because of our love of Lutyens, who kind of fell between the cracks in, this Pesner didn't approve, and yet is clearly an extremely skillful designer in the classical mode, vernacular, rustic, arts and crafts mode. And I think that where we're returning to seems to be in this neo-postmodern moment, or arguably, if postmodernism means anything in the visual arts and in literature and in cinema, it doesn't mean neoclassicism. It doesn't mean a conservative re-establishment of bogus empirical values. It means perhaps an eclectic approach to history and meaning. There were certain figures in the 20th century who were already operating with a degree of eclectic pleasure. And Edgar Wood, weirdly, both in Manchester and then in the south of France, because of his family.
60s television size, the origins of that kind of romantic modernism you see in set design actually lies in arts and crafts and a very historicist thing. It isn't something completely fresh. It does have a history going back further than you think. He's also responsible for the church in Manchester, which is possibly the weirdest building in Britain. He was like Macintosh. He never left his home city. The church, which was for the Christian Scientists, looks like Snow White's wedding palace. It's super picturesque. It's you expect dwarves to come out the front door. It's really peculiar. That might be, I'm post-rationalising that, having seen too many Disney films with my children. But you realise that what Disney was doing also has roots, obviously. But to see it in a church in a Manchester suburb is very peculiar.
So, partly, JoCA is a place for these lost figures, lost souls, which I think we all are to a certain extent, because our professional lives tend to try to force us to have one type of voice in one situation and another type of voice in another. What I'm interested in is this kind of threshold condition where one might be able to bring together things that otherwise you wouldn't say in public, both in publication and events like this. I thought it's really odd that when you start bringing people together and start having conversations, it's very similar to the design process, because things happen by chance, which of course you don't really know about. And so it transpires that Geraldine's family is from Galway, even though she's from the Midlands. And one of the poems that she's kindly offered to the magazine is called Hopeless on Hope Street, which of course is the street that runs famously in Liverpool between the Anglican and the Catholic cathedrals. So, Jodie, will you please read to us? I don't know where you want to stand or what you want to do.
Yeah, I'll probably stand, but I'll come out. Okay, thank you very much to Patrick for this invitation to read. And I've never read to architects before. Poets usually read to poets, and that doesn't always go well, so I'm hoping that you're all very friendly. When Patrick first asked me if I had any poems for this devastatingly beautiful new journal, I wasn't sure that I had anything suitable. I write very intuitively, and sometimes I don't know what I've written until I've started writing or finished, if then. But I realised that in fact cities and streets, spaces, enclosures, home, all of these things are very prevalent in my poems and are quite strong themes. I don't know if it's because I spent some years in enclosed monasteries, including some time in the Peruvian desert on the edge of a shanty town, and I always say for my sins, Michael. Perhaps that's one aspect that made me sensitive to enclosure and space. And also, I am half Irish, and there's always the home pull of Ireland, so maybe home is important too. And aside from that, recently, since I've had contact with Patrick, I've been thinking about the poem as architecture, as I was talking to a lovely Italian architect, and the word stanza is a room, isn't it, in Italian, and the stanzas of the poem are like the rooms, and they might be long, narrow rooms like couplets, or a sedate drawing room like a sonnet with a partition, or vast halls of blank verse or free verse. Or I like to write prose poems, and they don't have that ragged right-hand margins, they're just blocks. And so they all seem quite architectural in their own way, all little theatres for some drama to take place. I'm going to read the poems that are in the issue, but also I'm going to read one which was for a Poetry London commission for an art exhibition called Slatterns, which is still on until Sunday at the APT Gallery in Deptford Bridge, and it's curated by an American poet, Catherine Maris, and features 6 super female artists from South Korea, Russia, Ireland, Manchester, and the artist that I was assigned to is Angela Dufresne, a US artist who is very witty and theatrical in her work, and in fact she always includes architecture. At the exhibition there's a whole line of her pencil sketches, and each one contains some fantastic modernist building, and these are always very important to her. She had one canvas, it's not actually in the exhibition, but it was featured an unmade building by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was something that he'd designed but had never come to fruition, so she realised it in her portrait. The whole title of that one is Me and Bruce Lee and Another Famous Yet Unnameable Man in Front of an Unmade Building by Frank Lloyd Wright, called the Donahoe Triptych. The characters in the title become irrelevant in the painting, but the theatre for their actions is the visionary design by Wright. The work of hers which I responded to came from a phase when she was designing fantasy homes for all her favourite actors and artists, and the particular one is a home for Isabelle Huppert, French actor, particularly in her role in La Truite, The Trout, a 1982 Joseph Losey film, in which she plays rebellious, idiosyncratic beauty who attracts a lot of attention, but she counters it with insouciance, nonchalance, all those French words, and she is a bit like the trout of the title. She's very slippery and aloof. And so originally the film was based on a novel by Roger Vaillant, and I like the fact that the novel became the film, became Dufresne's artwork, and now my attempt to give it another form in this extract, Island Home for Isabelle Huppert. La Tweet. World is in love with Isabelle. Where Isabelle goes, what Isabelle knows. Isabelle's ideals to live alone in green, plumped up on an apple-bottomed sea. Au pair, mon père. In January to watch the hatchery flicker with fry, brown to silver. Tank full of trout leap, trout rinsed of winter sleep. In spring to write her faux memoir, macromere in summer with merry widow hat. Witness this island retreat for Isabelle and her menagerie. Far off, the world retrains its perma-gaze on Isabelle, would-be isolate. She feels the backlash of the gaze, eyes passing shots, passing hot through glass and metal, high-rise lenses with magnification magnifique. Pressed up close eyes on top of other eyes, fish eyes, no pest control. Smash cut to Isabelle waiting as directed in the new-built porch for a flame-haired housewarmer to come bless her home and the verdigris water, and sprinkle them with cardamom, then stuff her payment down a hen's throat, causing the hen to die. Isabelle's devouré virtues burn away into pretty vices. How can anyone expect full healing that way, she demands. Her own worn tiger, one of self-injuring populations, turns red and velvet like a baby's pet, spouting sour guff trivia. You flute your tongue like aeroplanes, and I know there will be inflammation, lambs playing king of the castle, bowdlerising the doll's house. How come it took so long to get this so wrong? These are your tears soiling the new tablecloths, little lovemaker. All the sorrows padded with origami rickshaws. Your offshore glance and restless legs speak reams. Your rooms papered with overliness. Ever a nagger's daughter, daggers drawn. Aimez-vous your new home, Isabelle? Are you fond of fondue? Tell us quick, Isabelle, for la vie est courte, and you have the open air of one moving backwards, fast. Stranded in Dublin for a longer weekend than intended a few years back in a cold snap, the city had run out of salt, and so my abiding memory is of pedestrians edging along the pavement, clinging to the railings so that they didn't fall over, and I think all the casualty departments had a lot of fractures that weekend also. This is snow rules. The laws of snow alter everything. The glamour of frost drops feather boas on proud lintels, stone shoulders of archbishops and republican heroes. Salt-starved Dublin teeters on ice, the railings a mainstay for walking unwounded, who cling. I learn the technique, hand over fist from others. We nod as we pass, chill-bitten, snorting like horses, totting up how many steps to the lip of the pavement across the ice patina. A girl at a bus stop circles the curb with the ball of her foot as if starting a dance, and the boy behind polishes a spot to bright glass, preparing a penalty. By tea time, O'Connell Street is hushed and set with dry white cloths, muffling drifts of milk powder. Monotone hundreds and thousands, quite distinct from London's funds of slush. From the bus, I see women shuffle, like Japanese ladies. We draw level, I see clearly, they are Japanese ladies. An African stumbles and Brazilian samba outside Café Sol. Poles look bemused as the city stood still. The radio intones the outlook. Bleak, overcast, dark, with biting winds from the north. Displaced and wrong-footed in a foreign city, I'm lost in a stranier of strange-making snow. The delicate snowflake has mastered the capital. with tremulous goose feathers, has clogged its throat. And there seemed to be very strong Irish connections in the first issue, which I'd never have guessed from the name of the editor. And certainly I never guessed when I submitted my next poem to him that he teaches in the iconic Hope Street of Liverpool, which is one of the great streets, and won the best street in UK and Ireland from the Academy of Urbanism in 2013, apparently. Hopeless on Hope Street. Hope lopes along like a bandit. Mrs. Molesworth looks sceptical, wants the streets cleaned up. What a pass when every low-looking male can stuff municipal waste bins with white stuff to believe in. Outside the barber's, Hope combs a moustache and finishes with a gloss of wax, taking care to equalise left and right. Mrs. Milkwater expostulates that low-looking girls can air their toilette in public as if at a show. She gathers up Hope's implements and secretes them in her handbag like hotel courtesies. Mannequins stand in protest as far as Bell Street, outside the town hall, 17 abreast. Their gaze favours the right side, where shop windows are spritzily lit and sparsely furnished. The man watering the council flower baskets is dazzled, transported to the Russian ballet, light on his feet as he leaps past, illegally snagging begonia from solicitors' window boxes. Hope stifles a cough, lifts a muffler. Mrs. Merriweather de-steams her glasses and considers the ways in which peace will come, by water and by blood. False sunlight falls hard. Hope struts on high heels. The street is busier now, flesh in flux. The evening is a belter. Lights stuck on red, people singing hymns at the zebra. Some men are cursing their lives while women wonder about crossing. Some set off together. Sometimes they drift back, swaying. And finally, I'm going to read a prose poem, the one that's in the issue, and it's a poem of home and belonging. And I remember reading that Thomas Hardy would always hear the tune of his lines before the words came along. And I'm not sure if it was before or after I wrote this poem, but I realised there was a perhaps not very elevated melody behind the opening phrase. And if you'll bear with me, I will foreground that in this reading. Thanks again to Patrick, and this is Muzzy McIntyre. Muzzy McIntyre brushed her bangs and went pell-mell down the staircase. The banisters pulled her palms back with their waxy residue, and the ball at the bottom looked grey-black with grease. This place has gone downhill, she thought, descending. But she went out onto the front step, and the mahogany door was flaming. It was that time of day. And the brass lion knocker, brilliant, was shooting out gold spears. All around, the red brick of the houses was deepening. For the sake of these 12 minutes or so, perhaps, one could tolerate the blanched mornings and the puny electric nights, the dust and critters, the drunken singing of the wind in the passage, the pious crooning of the neighbours, the waiting. Her other self, the slow Muzzy, ambled out to take the air. She looked up and down the street, laid the flat of her hand to her forehead against the slanting light. Another fine day tomorrow, she drawled, headlocking a memory. And that's it, and I'm really grateful to Patrick for bringing together.
Coming. The weirdness of this type of conversation is you probably don't know that Thomas Hardy trained as an architect.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whoa! Oceanic feeling. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice evening.